Wij zijn hier, het Nederlands Biergezelschap der Sokken in Alkmaar. En waar zijn we?
De Moersleutel.
Bij de Moersleutel. We gaan zo even binnenkijken, want het is de nationale
Moersleuteldag.
The full story, the full short version of the story is the dad, Sjors, who you often see wandering around here. I saw him earlier today fixing something. He worked at Tata Steel down the street, and he also started a brewery that he built called Brouwerij Moersleutel. That was in Hilo about 15 or so years ago. They didn't really do much, so you might not have heard of them. He had these 4 sons, and his sons all went into different engineering specialties. Some of them electrical engineering, one went into engineering and business, one other welding and design and that type of stuff. So then, inspired by their dad and homebrewing, they decided to start their own brewery. We moved into this space about 4 years ago, and nowadays there are two brothers who operate the brewery part of the company. One is head of operations, Rob, and also did pretty much all of the welding and design and built all of this brewery himself, and Pim, who runs the company. The other 2 brothers run a sister company called Zomerdijk Engineering, and that company designs and builds brewery equipment. So that's kind of the secret weapon to this brewery, is all of this stuff was designed and built by in-house engineering expertise, and we are kind of the concept prototype brewery for the other part of the company. So we get all of the prototype equipment, we get all the stuff designed. When something doesn't work, we tell them and they fix it. If something breaks, we don't call a welder and wait 2 weeks to get them to fix it. A welder down the street, or Rob, if he has time available, will fix it that same day. So it really makes it amazing to work in. And yeah, it's a family company, really great values. They want their employees to be happy and feel like members of the family. So they also take care of us really well, and they care that we have a good work culture. We have a philosophy of engineering, going to more bold flavors, building in better capabilities, and really pushing everything as far as we can get to. And you'll see that DNA and that kind of continuous improvement runs throughout the entire company, and is why we can do things that most breweries can't really do. Our double IPA, so there's not a lot of roast grain in here, and you can literally just eat it. It's Volkoren, grain, barley, and wheat mostly, so it does have the hull on it. It's not, it's literally Volkoren. So it's a bit, grainier than what you'd expect, but you can eat it and you go ahead. Latest project of the brother. This is our grain handling facility and these malt silos. These 2 are 8-ton malt silos, so we'll have 8,000 kilos of base malt, and these 2 are 2,000. So that will be 4 different base malts that we can use as the base of our beer, and we use 30 different malts in a year on a routine basis. And in an entire year, we will, I think, use 50 different malts. So that's much more than most breweries. It allows us to make more diverse beer and use a lot of grains that a lot of breweries can't use. So we have a partnership with a Danish farm called Gerritsen, who grow heritage grains for their whiskey production. So they make whiskey, but we have a partnership with them. They will do custom malts and custom smoked malt and those type of things for us. And from that came the Odd Grain series of beers we did in the past years. So Odd Grain buckwheat, emmer, spelt. Those were using heritage, high percentages of heritage grains to try and get more unusual malt flavors into our beers. These malt silos, these are all automated on load cells, so the computer can tell how much grain is coming out of the malt silo, so the malt handling will be largely automated. Through these conveyors, I think this is called a chain and plate conveyor, carries it over to 2 mills and back. Yes, we use 2 mills because we're crazy and perfectionists, so the computer will control what malt goes into what mill. For a stout, for heavily roasted grains, you don't want to put them through, you don't want to grind them to a powder, because then the beer will end up being ashy and astringent. So we put that through a coarse roller mill that just kind of cracks the grains. They're already so roasted and black that they don't really need more than just a cracking to be able to get all the flavor out of them. But the other ones and the unroasted adjuncts, we all mill to a flour. That gets all of the oils and all of the flavor and all of the carbohydrate possible out of those type of grains. So that's something most breweries don't do. And we can get more of that in a second.
You grind it in the grinding mills and then it will go to the silos?
No, the whole grain goes to the silos.
Okay,
and then it
goes to the mill.
And then it goes through these conveyors into the mill, and then it's milled. And this is not online yet, it's about to be online, it's the next big project. And then from it being milled, it goes into that kind of grist case, which is then goes through a second conveyor into the actual production space on the other side of that wall. So a stout of ours uses in one brew. A brew is 25 hectoliter in our brew kettle. In one brew, we put in 3,000 kilos of grain. So that means in every can of stout is 300 grams of grain, and that will overflow a can. That's why we really like malt. We like malty flavors. That's how much grain goes into one can, and why our beers are so rich and so flavor rich. So, and it's that, and it's using 30 different grains, all of these things. The mash filter we'll talk about in a second. The mash filter is one of our secret weapons. Yeah.
Gaaf hè Bart?
Ja, dat is wel heel erg tof.
Is that you, from that dry grain, you make a very thick oatmeal, right? And then from that oatmeal, you filter out the sugar water. Now most breweries that do that, they use gravity and kind of a filter plate, and they allow the oatmeal to kind of drain its liquid. And then you rinse that with a little more water, hot water, and out of that comes the sugar water. Now, we do it a bit differently. So what we do is we use something called a mash filter, which is this device with plates that you'll see. Now it turns out that I think about 90% of the world's beer is actually made with a mash filter system, but all of that is Pilsner, macro Pilsner. Macro Pilsner all use mash filters because it's the most efficient. It gets all of the sugar out of the grain, and it's automatable, and it works well in a production environment. But no craft brewery can really afford them. So we're one of the very few craft breweries in Europe that actually has a mash filter. Now, what do we do with that? The mash filter uses hydraulic pressure to squeeze every drop of liquid out of the grain, and then the grain falls as a dry powder out of the system. So you get every bit of sugar. It's really efficient. You can really get 100% efficiency. And it also allows you to get much more concentrated wort. So a lot of our worts out of this mash filter start off at what they call 30 Plato. And that allows our stouts to be really extreme. Whereas most breweries wouldn't be able to do that. They would get 20 Plato wort, and then they have to add a bunch of sugar to it to bring it up to the right ABV. But for us, it's all, a lot of the beers are all grain, and you get every amount of sugar, and all of the flavor really from all of those 3,000 kilos of grain. And then they go into this kettle where the wort boils. And this kettle is 25 hectoliters, or 2,500 liters. Our tanks are 50 hectoliters. Most of these tanks here. Right here in the front are 2,500 hectoliters. Those are our small tanks. Those tanks are where we brew the guild exclusives because the volume is too small for the general market. So we brew the membership exclusive beers. And those two tanks. we don't just press it dry and then that's it, because we don't want to really dilute it and water down. And because we use a mash filter, we can still get 95% of the sugar out. And let's see, this is the mash filter. That's how complicated it is with all of these pumps and sensors. All of these also have a full history save because it's literally pharmaceutical level software. So for any sensor or any temperature or the hot water tank, the hot water tank level has a sensor. For all of those, you can go back in and look at the history and what has this sensor done in the entire batch of beer, when did it go on and off. That's the level of automation and kind of brains that is in the DNA of this company. So yeah, the mash filter allows us to use any grain we want without really any limitation. High buckwheat, high rye, really anything we can dream of. We put like stroopwafel crumbs through the mash filter before. Really anything you can think of, it will accept. The other thing that's really unique about us is we like to use a lot of weird ingredients in our beers. So we started off with that little vessel we call Little Muffin Top. It has a steel filter plate in it, and that's where we put the nuts, the cacao nibs, etc. in there, vanilla. You can put 80 kilos of nuts, 40 kilos of coconut flakes, and I think 100 kilos of cacao nibs in that vessel. And so that was great, and that worked really well for a long time. Right now it is holding coffee for tiramisu triplets. That beer has hazelnuts, chocolate, hazelnuts, cacao nibs, vanilla, and coffee. Now the coffee, we like a very short extraction time. We don't want it to be very long, so the coffee is done in that vessel separately. But that wasn't big enough. So then we built this really big one. This is the second generation of our Additions tank, the big muffin top. And right now, this pump is actually recirculating cacao nibs for the 7 chocolate edition of Willy Tonka and the 7 Chocolates, which is a beer coming out next month. So it's recirculating this packaging vessel. This is the packaging vessel with this pump powered by compressed air for our compressor. And it pumps into these tangential inlets into a giant bed of cacao nibs. And then there is a filter candle in here that's a steel filter tube that then the beer comes back out of into the tank. So these are other things that this type of equipment did not really exist 10 years ago. This one was built by the other side of the company in part because you couldn't really easily buy such a thing recently. They make ones now designed for hops, but I don't think anyone makes one designed specifically for nuts and those type of things. We just got out of time. But yeah, a Wild Goose 5-head filler makes 40 cans a minute when everything's kind of cranking. But then it goes through, there's a little circular plate, that's a check weigher. It weighs every can. This was built by the other side, the Zomerdijk Engineering. It weighs every can. If the can is too low or too high, it kicks it out and knocks it out of the production line. Then there's a mixing table, and then the labeler, date coder, and this case packer, which uses pneumatic pressure, so you don't have to lift all of the cans to put them in a box, but it lifts them for you. This is all stuff built by, you see the Zomerdijk Engineering brand and logo. The decal, which automatically will put the cans, take them off of a pallet and put them into this production line. That was all built by the engineering side of the company. And it really makes it, it makes it nice to work here, to have the people who design your equipment really a text message away to fix things when things aren't working quite well. That works out to about 500 hectoliter of volume. And for our barrel aged beers, they all spend on average of 1 year in the barrel. Lowest is about 9 months. Longest could be 15 months. It depends on the barrel. If a barrel is heavily cracked and roasted and a bit thinner, it will age faster. but some, we'll just sit on until they're perfect. So some take up to 15 months. That means we produce about 500 hectoliter of barrel-aged beer in a year as we turn them all around once. All those beers are single-use barrels. We don't like to reuse barrels because it doesn't give you the best quality and best flavor the second time around. You get maximum flavor after that first filling. So we also sell a lot of barrels. If you're interested in buying them, we sell our used barrels just to get rid of them. And a lot of bourbon barrels. Part of the rules of bourbon is in the bourbon production process, you can only use a barrel once. So there's a lot of secondhand bourbon barrels available. But we also like much more extreme barrels. Our latest two that we got in were Cognac and Armagnac. Cognac barrels were famous in the brewery for going into what is widely considered the best barcode, red and black. Personally, I like red and black better, so we're going back to some Cognac. Our next barrels that are in are Marsala barrels in next month. Our Marsala is a fortified red wine. So for that, we're brewing, I believe, a bit more of like a barley wine style thing than a roasted stout. One thing we do that's different than breweries, or another thing we do, is we don't barrel age motor oil. We don't barrel age Willy Tonka. Those beers are brewed to be a specific thing. We have a lot of experience now, so we know what flavors we want, what will happen to a beer after a year of barrel aging. So we brew beer thinking backwards. We brew different barrel-aged beer for our barrels than we do for our normal production process, so that after a year in the barrels, it's really where we want it to be. We look at the flavor, look at the barrel, what we're going to get, and then we brew kind of a specific thing.
Wat ontzettend tof om te zien, de brouwerij van Moersleutel. Wat een verhaal, hè?
Fantastisch.
Geweldig, hè?
Heel mooi.
In de lente van 2024 opent naar verwachting de nieuwe brouwerij van Moersleutel. En daarmee zijn we eigenlijk ook wel heel benieuwd naar hoe dat er dan tegen die tijd uit komt te zien. Dus als we de kans hebben als Sokken, wie weet...
Sokken weet!